Hello again. I was just gonna do the last video in the build along marking gauge, and all of a sudden I got told that I had to include someone else in the video. So say hi, Alf. It's getting a bit late in the evening here. We've been working on the last bits. The last video. Oh, you want to stand on there? What? Yes, that's gas. I don't want. Sometimes. And the last video. Go on then, stand on there. Right. In the last video. In the last video, we talked about just using a standard screw to for the pin, and you're going to fall off there. You're going to fall off there, Mush. And then we decided that after that, once that was made, and I see quite a lot of people have been making them, so I'm going to post a collective gallery thread, and we can all put all the ones that we've done up there. But that's brilliant. I can see everybody's got them working, and that's really, really comforting, because it means that you know, it should be a successful, simple project, which is what we planned right at the beginning for everybody. And if you remember rightly, we took the standard Victorian. That's not a bow stick. Yeah. What did we do with this? Yeah, we kissed it, didn't we? We took the standard one, and I made a beach. A copy exactly as the original, which was the plan. So once that's done and that's all been completed, I mentioned that I would talk about putting on the last article and a video together to show you the making of the wedge type. Now, I had made one previously. It's over here, Alf. You see, I'm supposed to be standing up. This one I made ages ago, probably one of the first tools that I made. It's lignum vitae and brass. It's a standard screw type fixing fence, so that's, you know, pretty orthodox. But this one has a little bronze slug that sits underneath the screw, which allows it to clamp quite easily to brass without damaging it. So you can use a steel end on the screw, and that locks down really well. I was pretty naive in the time, and so I made this wedge type one. I like this design for a cutting gauge, not a marking gauge, but a cutting gauge. And but I was pretty naive at the time of how it worked. I've learned a lot since that day. Oi. God. You're not comfortable. And so I now know that inside that square hole, it's actually a tapered hole in two directions, and the wedge is tapered in two directions as well. So I'm going to have to put this tool. This time of night, Alfie wants to come and cuddle, and it's a needy thing, isn't it? Eh? And anybody new comes around, he wants to do the same thing. But I noticed that in the square hole that you've got, it can be seen a lot easier on this larger one here. There's a square hole in the bottom, and you'll notice the wedge goes in sideways, not the other way around. That's because it's tapered in two directions. So when you tap it in, not only are you locking it in place, but also you're forcing the flat blade, or the flat side of the blade, against the flat side of the hole. So the square hole is square, but the top side, this side, is a taper, and this side is a taper. Doesn't matter which side it is, but two of the sides at right angles to each other are tapers, so that when you put the wedge in, it forces the cutter backwards against the flat, and it locks it in place on the other wedge. So it's quite complicated. I'm going to try to show this on the article, but I also, with a blowtorch, you can use a standard gas cylinder type one. There are many ones available from model makers, or you can use a kitchen stove. It really doesn't matter. Standard sunflower oil, vegetable oil, or rapeseed oil, anything you can get hold of. Even the old stuff you just finished before you throw it out after making the chips. you could use that. And you just need to get it up to orangey cherry red. So it's an orange red, not yellow. So don't let it go as far as yellow. That's too hot in it, Alf. Yes. But not as dark as, say, blood red. You need to get it up to a kind of an orangey cherry, a tango red, orange. And then once it's at that temperature, leave it there for a few seconds. It's only a tiny cutter. You're supposed to leave it soaking at that temperature for an hour per inch cube. That's a lot. That's a lot of metal. So you don't need that much at all. You literally, with something this size, and we're really talking a tiny piece of 01 steel like that, you only need about 30 seconds to a minute. Once it's continuously stayed at the orange temperature for that amount of time, drop it straight into a little cup with vegetable oil in it, and you can just use a pair of pliers to hold it. It's not going to get hot. Once it's cooled down in the oil, take it out of the oil, turn it round, and the top half of it, just heat it up a little bit and let that soak down, and that will temper it so you can sharpen it. With this, I just cut it. There's some pictures. I just cut the shape I needed. The 01 steel, that's oil quenchable steel type 1. So if you've got W1, it's water quenchable steel type 1, etc. And this is available all over the world, especially Sheffield, which is where this comes from. But this is an offcut, so you just save your offcuts when you get this steel. It's quite valuable to have. You never know when you're going to make yourself a nicker or cutter or blade or anything like that. So they're always handy to have. Cuts with a hacksaw, not a problem. But once it's hard, solid as rock. In fact, I cut the end of my finger. I don't even ask. What did we do then, Alf? What did we do? We polished up the mark. Oh yeah, we made some brass. We made a brass wedge. There we go. And again, you can cut this by hand using a hacksaw. It's just standard CZ30 blah 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 something or other, malleable brass. Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? Yes. Down you get. I always save the offcuts of that. As you can see, it's a completely blank sheet, uncut. That's because I found an offcut. Tiny little offcut. That's another cutter. You see. So you just cut out the shape of the wedge. Now the wedge shape can be basically anything you want for the head, for the actual finial, it's called, the head of the wedge. But the actual angle of the wedge, I would go for something in the region of 6 to 8 degrees, something like that. Not too steep, not too shallow. That way, you can be assured that it's gonna work. Drill a round hole first, that's roughly the size of the cutter that you've got, and use the cutter to make the one square edge. So make the cutter first, and then tap the cutter down the square edge that's closest to the fence, because that's where you want the square edge to be when you're using it as a cutting gauge. And then flip it over and do the same on the other side, and then use it just to make tapers. The actual cutter, if you've hardened it correctly, makes an excellent chisel with a hammer. Or you can use one of these tiny little mortise chisels. You can get them in England. I understand you can also get them slightly different shaped in America. Brilliant chisel, superb thing to have. You could knock the sides out of the hole in that in no time at all. So just to reiterate, the square hole has one side nearest the fence flat, has one side, doesn't matter which, 90 degrees to that, flat, and the other two sides are tapered to the bottom of the hole, so they taper as they go down and get smaller at the end. So the actual top hole, square hole, is bigger than the bottom square hole, where it pokes itself out. That's tiny. That'll lock into place, never come out. It's difficult enough as it is to get it out. When you want to get it out, you can just set it really finely. And I tell you, I did it on some yew today, which has got some seriously whizzing around grain. Here you can see. And it's an absolutely perfect cut all the way through the grain at grazing angles as well. And that's pretty, that's a pretty good test of a cutting gauge. I'll take some still photographs of that, and you'll be able to see that. when we're done. Oh, water, just final thing before we go, because we've got to go and have a cup of tea, ain't we? You gonna go and have a cup of tea? You gonna have a cup of tea with me, mate? Yes, you're mad. Walter asked, could someone demonstrate the action that this type of gauge does? It's basically, because this is locked. It's got a wider shape in the hole, locking it, so that when you turn it to line up with the comma, click, and then it's loose. See? But turn it like that, and it stays wherever you put it. So that makes it really, really fast. You see? And attractive to dogs. Every single one of these that I've made, haven't they? This is your one then. You like that? Oh, don't lick it. Every single one that I've made makes the same noise and does the same job and locks the same way as the original. That's the original. That's the beach one. You can hear it. Yeah. And it locks perfectly. So highly successful, isn't it? I was going to do some wear strips. They are just inlays. I will take some photographs. I won't bring them up in this video. I wanted to get this off and done and take some photographs, and then I'll do some fancy inlay work with some routers, a specialist tool that I make myself, just a little kind of like a cross between a router and a scratch, and it makes you allows you to do inlays in sort of straight lines. That's an ideal tool for this sort of thing. But generally speaking, I think it's been a bit of a success, hasn't it, mate? Yeah, and you've enjoyed it, haven't you? All right then, so you're going to say goodbye. Say goodbye to everybody. You're going to say goodbye to everybody. They're up there, look. Where are they? Where's your mum? Go see your mum then. Go on, off you go. Oh no, remind me never to do a video with him again. Please remind me. See you later, guys.